right, so let's get started. So I do want to kind of remind ourselves that what are the goals of this series of lessons? Because I think I showed this slide in the first week of it. Because we want to answer the question of the rapture and also where will we be in Daniel chapter 7. So let's see it from the scriptures where it is, what's the nature of the rapture. And as you probably noticed, the last couple of slide decks, there's a lot of verses. So this will give you an opportunity to study those verses, that if you want to dig deeper into the meaning of that, as well as the context of that passage. Because sometimes I could just say a passage, but there's a lot of context that goes with it, and I just can't, spend the time to kind of lay out all that context in order to point out these verses. So today you'll probably see at least 100 verses, 100 passages today, just shown here. But just so that you can do your homework. But I wanted to give it to you. And I want to highlight this in yellow. It's really practical, where I don't want us to kind of look at Bible as just a bunch of doctrine, but there's a purpose behind the doctrine. And that purpose gives us truth that gives us the practice of how to live our lives, right? So this truth should shape our lives. So I'm hoping as we get toward the end that the last part, the so-called punchline, is to understand how does understanding the rapture impact how we live. That's the goal there. And so with the three main sections, right now we're still going through a lot of preparation. I'm giving you a lot of context, a lot of prerequisite information so you can understand the scope of these end times, and then we'll go through the proof. So that should be fun to try to give you a proof of pre-trib rapture. So that's, and then with that, some practical aspects of gaining clarity as to an insight of how do we use this, how do we live based on that. So the first week, we went through a lot of passages, and that the rapture is a recent doctrine. We talked about progressive revelation that led to a number of passages that are really only talk about the rapture after Acts 2, because if the church has not been established, anything before that, the authors would not have been speaking with the church in mind, because it hasn't been formed yet. And to me, this is where a lot of the mistakes of interpretations of Matthew 24 talks about the church. That, as I mentioned in my email, Matthew 24 the author could not be talking about the church because the church has not been formed yet, right? So that's kind of impossible. As well as the audience of the book of Matthew is to the Jews, not the Gentiles. And then also we talked about the progress of doctrine. Eschatology is hard, not because it's ambiguous, but because it's really precise. And I will show you a lot of this preciseness in the various prerequisites next week. So here, part 2 last week, we went through a number of items or events that are connected with the world being set up. And we talked a little bit about some verses of the last days. And we talked about the rapture, kind of introducing it. So today, we're going to go through the second half. So this is the... I still got all the animation here. So this is the timeline of the world being set up, and we went through a lot of the beginning through this. These are the colors for the image in Daniel 2 of the image: gold, silver, bronze, and so iron, and so forth. So now that we've went through this last week, we're going to go through 4B, which is the iron and the clay mixed up at the toes. And this is where sorry, the pointer doesn't work well in the blue background. So 4b, where the toes is a break in time, because we're going so far out toward eternity that it doesn't fit in a linear or even the logarithmic scale. So this is kind of how it's laid out, and then 5 is God's kingdom. So we saw how the world is being set up by all these events, and these are the passages that speak to it. Today we're going to try to cover all of the rapture all the way to the new heavens and earth in Jerusalem. That'll be today. And this is so that we can have a baseline of this is what I believe as the timeline of history. So we start with the patriarchs on the far left, the prophets, the times of the prophets, then Christ, and then the church age is where we are. Next event will be the rapture, and that's where we have the judgment seat of Christ, where we will see the rewards. And then the tribulation. The term the tribulation is 7 years. Second half is called the Great Tribulation. It ends at the Battle of Armageddon, where there'll be a judgment of the nations. That ushers in the millennium, 1,000 years. Then comes the great white throne judgment. And that's for all the Revelation calls it the earth dwellers. And then after that's finished, then comes the New Jerusalem. So this is kind of layout. And within that, the tribulation, that 7-year period between the rapture and the Battle of Armageddon, there's just a lot of I don't want to use the word characters, but you have Israel, you have the Antichrist, the false prophet, so forth. You have the 2 witnesses, Michael, the archangel, and you got Christ's second coming, and so forth. So all this is mapped out in correspondence to the book of Revelation. This just to give you a flavor of the things that are the subject matters that are at hand. I'm not going to be addressing these, but I just want to just give you that as a frame of reference, right? I added this chart again. You've seen this before. I just want to make this point because this last bullet is the most exacting, nuanced disciplines because it requires the most prerequisites. And this is where some people that analyze things, they would say, oh, I see that's the sky is a certain way, or a blood red moon or something, and then they just jump right into a comparison where you really need to look at the context and the nuance of why that's used in that verse to describe that situation. You can't just blindly go, oh, map one for one, right? And so I gave you this example last time where this person correlated 2 passages, and even the first row, Matthew 24:30 says, Son of Man. Well, 1 Thessalonians 4:16 says, for the Lord himself. Yes, it's about Jesus Christ, but the title of Jesus in these passages has a meaning. So you can't just make them equal. They're equal that they're both Jesus, but then let's look through the context more as to what that might mean. So, coming from the clouds shall descend from heaven, okay? And then this is one that really is a point of contention for many, which is Matthew 24:31 says, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. Sound of a trumpet. And then 1 Thessalonians 4:16 says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trump of God. Then they equate the trumpet and the trump of God. Okay? Right? And if you dig deeper, that's not the case. I just got a book that spent like think maybe 12 pages on this, on describing what is the great sound of a trumpet, how it is not one of the trumpet sounds of Revelation. That's for sure is not. Because when Matthew wrote this, Revelation hasn't even been written yet. So you can't equate that, right? Some people would equate that. And so there's a lot of different views of this, but there's some practical applications of what is this trumpet sound mean, and why would the audience that received this passage know what it means. So that's something I'll dig into next week, because I think this particular 3 verses, 29 to 31, has so many things that are just people can just go out in left field on certain, and then once they do that, it just gets more and more off track, all right? And then verse 31 says, gather his elect. Well, who are these elect? That's one question. Versus, who are these that are the dead shall rise first and remain shall gather with him? So these are different groups of people that we need to understand, so that these aren't equal. All right? So I'll explain this more, but I just want to just give you this picture of that. Eschatology is hard. It's really precise, that you need to understand. Just can't just go that way. And so this is the passage we'll talk about next week, in particular verses 29 to 31. And I just want to highlight just some of this. Some people have interpreted the tribulation of those days, and they would say, oh, what tribulation is that? Is it this? Is it that? Versus looking at it in the context of, well, Jesus just said, after the Great Tribulation. So this is not just any tribulation. It is referring to the Great Tribulation. And what also helps us, it says, of those days. That phrase, of those days, happens very often in Matthew 24. It points to a certain event, not just any old tribulation, not any old days. Okay? And then you see the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and that's another contentious point at times. And then one thing that really helps us understand this passage is like, all the tribes of the earth will mourn. What does that mean? If it was the rapture, why are people mourning? It doesn't make sense. So we have to understand, what does that phrase mean within this, and what is it? What is this describing? And then these people that mourn will see. So here you got some group of people that will see. So this is not just to believers. Raptures is to believers that see Christ coming, right? So here it seems like the audience that see the Son of Man appearing in the sky is more than just believers. So this gives us another clue that this is not the same event, right? And here is this great trumpet. Gathered together his elect is another term of different interpretations. And it's interesting that when the Bible capitalizes portions of the text, it's actually using another passage that the author is quoting from. So it takes a lot of digging to really understand this passage. All right. And then one end of the sky to another. What does that mean? So this I will explain this next week. And one thing that really helps us in eschatology is these the text in orange. Immediately after, then. The time sequence of these passages gives us clues as to what it means. You can't just say, oh, this tribulation is from here and this is from here. You can't grab like that. Okay? So it's really important to look at the timestamps. And the book of Revelation, most of the book has like the word and or then. In the Greek, I think it's kai. I think it occurs like a few hundred times in the book of Revelation. So it just kind of gives you a step-by-step as to how that goes. And Pastor Cliff, I think, preached twice of the series of Revelation. It's on the website, so you can refer to that. All right, so maybe this will motivate you to study this passage and figure out what do these terms mean if you want to dig deeper. All right. Okay, so today, just to give you a kind of a frame of reference, the rapture to the new heavens and new earth, and there are three major blocks of periods of time that helps us to kind of bin where things should be. So the first is the tribulation period of 7 years. That's in Daniel 9:27, as well as Matthew 24:9. Then the Jesus 1,000-year reign on the earth, and then the new heavens and new earth and Jerusalem. Oops. So the first one is the rapture. We're going to look into that. Believers will be caught up in the air to be with Christ. Will receive imperishable bodies. Believers be with the Lord in heaven forever. That's really important, because you don't go rapture up and come back down or things like that. So that helps us to understand the logistics of things. 7-year tribulation, we'll see the rise of the Antichrist. We will actually study a lot of that in Daniel chapter 8, the rise of the Antichrist. There'll be the sealed judgments in the first half. The abomination that causes desolation, that's the middle of this tribulation. Then you'll see the trumpet and bowl judgments, and it ends with the, close to the end, with the Battle of Armageddon. And that comes to an end as the second coming of Jesus comes. Antichrist reign ends. He comes, the Antichrist reign is over. Jesus reigns on the earth. Satan is bound. And then there'll be some passages talk about the resurrection of the tribulation martyrs and the Old Testament saints. That's the second coming of Jesus. Then we'll see the millennial reign of Christ. They'll talk about the believers and tribulation martyrs will co-reign with Christ. Such an unbelievable honor to do that. Marriage supper of the Lamb happens. There'll be this 1,000 years will be a period of worldwide knowledge of God, of peace, of justice, of obedience. Amazing passages, mainly from the book of Isaiah. And then what I wrote on the bottom bar, that silver bar, is what I call the day of the Lord. It starts at the rapture, ends at the end of the millennium. That's why there's that silver bar there. Where the others, the colors correspond to those blocks. All right? You get a copy of this deck, so you can take a look at it more. So that's the day of the Lord. At least I consider that as a definition in terms of the period. Some people think it's a one day versus a period of time. Right? At that time, at the end of the millennium, the devil is thrown into the lake of fire. Then there's the great white throne judgment. And then there's the new heavens and earth and Jerusalem. Okay. And so this is kind of give you a timeline of it. Next is, I want to go through the rapture, because that's our first block there. And the main point on the rapture is that Jesus will take his church to be with him. That's the comforting hope. That is the encouragement that we have looking forward to. His coming is imminent, meaning that it could come anytime. All the prophecies which need to be fulfilled have been fulfilled. And because he can come anytime, this is what really, if you believe in this doctrine, it makes the other views of amillennial and postmillennial, in a way, defy this doctrine. because they would predict when the tribulation is and all that, and then they could actually kind of calculate when the second coming and the rapture, because they think the same event will come. So it's like with that so-called theory, the doctrine of imminence doesn't kind of exist anymore, because they know where all the things are happening leading to when the rapture is. So that's I think the downfall of those views. It says that he will descend with a shouted command, voice of an angel, the trumpet of God. All church believers, living and dead, will suddenly meet the Lord in the air. And so one passage that really helps us to kind of support the pre-tribulation is that Revelation 3:10 says that Christians will escape the tribulation. You will not have to go through that hour. Jesus will rapture the church before the tribulation begins, will physically return to remove his waiting church from the earth, reward them according to their works. This judgment will occur before God's judgments are poured out upon the unbelieving world. Yeah, Lane.
Can you explain verse Revelation 3:10, how it applies to pre-trib and not post-trib? The post-trib friends also use this verse, but saying God would keep the saints from the hour of testing, like then still experience the tribulation, but then they were able to be protected or escape from because they survived the broadcast.
So the post-tribulation view uses verse to escape from God's wrath or judge?
From tribulation.
From tribulation?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're there, but God protect them, but they still experience them. But then that would explain how God kept some to witness to those who haven't heard, because the Holy Spirit isn't not there.
Yeah.
During that time, how do you explain that gap or that?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna guess what post-tribs think with that view is that if they're gonna be kept from the hour of testing or from that testing would be some of the judgments within Revelation chapters 6 through 19, somewhere. Right? Whether it's the seal judgments, whether it's the bowl or the trumpet judgments. So if post-tribbers believe that, then at the beginning of the seal judgments, let's say, the very beginning in chapter 6, then you have all this, what I'll call God's wrath poured out. Somehow, these people are protected through some or most of that time frame. And then, when the millennium comes, there will be some people, let's say, that will enter it to where they can continue to preach the gospel. So, it could be that, but the main thing the post-tribbers, I think, would think is that God's people would survive through the seal judgments and some of those, leading to that they're spared of something, but what is that something? Is it the Great Tribulation? Is it so that's a matter of defining what are they being spared of and what did they have to endure. And the argument that in Revelation 3:10 that church will not go through that is because after Revelation chapter 3, the term church does not appear throughout all the way through chapters 4 to 19. So there's many opportunities for the Apostle John to say something about the church, but it's not mentioned in chapters 4 through 19. So it's like, where are they? That's just one of many arguments, but I think for post-trib to consider what wrath they're being kept from or protected from, the definition of wrath needs to be laid out.
It also doesn't make any sense that God's elect, believers on that earth would be treated differently than the believers that come to salvation during those 7 years. In other words, how would the church going into tribulation be especially protected, whereas God would say, well, I don't love this other group who's coming to salvation late during these last 7 years, so now there's going to be tribulation martyrs in that group, but not in the first group. It doesn't make sense. All of God's family is God's family. And all those who were saved in the church age are raptured and saved from this. And then there's a special group of tribulation saints who become tribulation martyrs, many of them. Some survive the millennial kingdom, but many don't. It doesn't make sense to God to have two groups of his family. One's especially protected, one isn't.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that the tribulation views take the first thing they can see, they determine God's wrath is only the last 3.5 years. That's how they can explain the tribulation wrath. Right? So, you'll just be kept in the last bad half of the 3.5 years. So they'll latch on to that, right? There are that live with Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 4, literally do the equation of those two to stand over the tribulation.
Yeah.
The argument against that is that the first 4 seals are in the first 3.5 years, and a fourth of the world's population dies. So you can't say that somehow there's no significant tribulation going on at that point. Right.
Yeah. So
in Matthew 24, the Son of Man will say, well, that happens in Revelation chapter 5 and 6, so on there. So you're already at the midpoint, and it says you see the Son of Man coming, so they say that mid-tribulation coming in Christ.
Yeah, you can see these discussions can go through a lot, and a lot of it goes through the definition of what is wrath, what is being kept, and so forth. So this is the nuance that we have to really study to understand that. And I've thought about maybe even having a study on like debunking the pre-wrath views, but it's just like there're just so many. It's like I'm going to end up diversion off of the book of Daniel. I really want to finish the book of Daniel, believe it or not. So it's like,
So Peter, I just want to say, even within the post-mill views, a lot of the stuff that takes place in Revelation has already taken place.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the tribulation and all that stuff, they don't look to a future tribulation to come. They believe that's already taken place. And so at this point in time we're working in the millennium kingdom time, and we're going to work toward trying to get everyone saved via the preaching of the gospel. So some of their views can conflict with each other for sure. But that's why you wouldn't necessarily have an argument with them about the tribulation, because they think it's already taken place.
Yeah, and what makes it really hard for that view is that Jesus said, well, the world has never seen, right? The level of,
Exactly.
It's like, how can you say, oh, the worst has already happened if we're in post-mill view. So anyway, all right. Good discussions, Okay, so I want to walk you through the rapture with 3 of, I think, the key passages on the rapture. Right? So we have 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 to 18. We have 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 to 53, and John 14, 1 to 3. Those 3 passages, I think, are probably the key passages on the rapture. Okay? So as you read through this, the basis is, a lot of it is 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 to 18. It says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord. That's a very key phrase. Okay. And then that helps us to kind of understand a bit of the timeline and the activities of the rapture. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 to 53, talks a bit about our transformation. So it says, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. So what do we need to do? Not we, but what do our bodies need to be is we need to go from perishable to imperishable. So, behold, I tell you a mystery. So this is where this word mystery is new information. Information that has not been given throughout the so-called canon of the New Testament until now. This is new information. What is this new information? That you will not sleep. You will not sleep. So when you physically die, if you're a believer, we will all be changed. We'll be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, that fast. At the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable. And we will be changed. For this perishable must put on imperishable, this mortal must put on immortality. This helps us understand, well, when we're raptured, what happens is we will receive imperishable bodies. And then John 14 talks about, well, where are we going to go after we get raptured and meet with the Lord? I love the beginning, the verse 1, do not let your heart be troubled. So much of the rapture is a comforting hope to give to the believers. This to me is one of the big distinctions between the rapture and the second coming. There's comfort, there's hope, there's something that you ought to look forward to with the coming of Christ. Not that there's going to be judgment, not there's going to be all this wrath and all these things that are happening around you. So, do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. Some translations say mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself. So when he says, I will come again, that means he's in heaven preparing this place for you. He'll come again down to in the air to get you. And then where I am, because I forget you, you will also be in heaven. Okay? So I broke this down into six points here to describe this rapture of the church that uses these three passages. So first is Christ will descend. We saw that in 1 Thessalonians 4. Souls of dead church saints, they will descend. The souls of dead church saints are in heaven. When you die, you're in paradise. So the souls will descend. Why? To receive their imperishable bodies. Okay.
We're sleeping.
You're asleep. Yeah, we're all sleeping. Yeah. Yeah. And then 1 Thessalonians 4 says that the dead in Christ will rise first. So the bodies of the dead church saints will rise, will be raised. And then the bodies of the church saints who have not died, who actually got to witness this second coming, what will they do? Their bodies will be changed. These bodies of living church believers, when the second coming of Christ, what will they get? They will be changed to imperishable bodies. Okay. So then both the resurrected saints that passed away and the ones that have not died, both groups, then they will be caught up. They will be caught up together to meet with Christ in the air. So you got the ones that passed away, their bodies from the grave will be caught up, along with the living saints will also be caught up. And then the church saints will return will return with Christ, and then to the Father's house in heaven. Okay. So putting these three passages together helps us understand what's going on, so that this gives us a lot of hope that as Christ descends with this shout, with this trumpet sound, souls of the dead saints will descend to meet Christ in the air. Bodies will be raised from the grave to meet Christ in the air. The living saints would meet Christ in the air, and then all will be caught up so that they can be with Christ forever and will go to the Father's house. Okay? So this is the kind of description. So this will happen in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. And so this is of such great comfort because end of verse 18 of 1 Thessalonians 4 says, we shall always be with the Lord. That is so comforting. Right? And then verse 3 of John 14, where I am, there you will be also. So this is the hope that we have with the rapture. And if you think about the second coming, there's not hope, but there's also judgment. These passages don't talk anything about judgment. Big difference, okay? Make sense? Yeah.
So this is just the church, not the Old Testament believers like Abraham.
Right. Yeah, this is just the church.
We're the bride of Christ, and Abraham is the wife of Yahweh.
I think Abraham and the Old Testament saints, they are talked about in Daniel 12 when they get to be with the Lord. So when we get to Daniel 12, I'll explain all the different groups. Okay. A lot of stuff here. A lot of stuff. So, all right. So the 7-year tribulation. The moment after the rapture, the Spirit of God will be removed. Will remove any restraining influence on the earth. So this is where there's just a lot of things that are going to be far, far worse than we've ever experienced today. There'll be diseases, natural disasters, wars, and so forth. The Antichrist will be sitting at the center of this tribulation evil, and the Antichrist will be controlled basically by Satan during this time. 7-year tribulation period, climax of worsening conditions. And so believers alive at the rapture will miss these 7 years. That's what pre-tribulation view believes. Okay. So in the first half of the tribulation, in a way back earlier chart, you saw the 4B that was toward the far right, and that's the revived Roman Empire, meaning the 10 toes, iron and clay. So it's mentioned in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 in those verses. So the first half of the tribulation period of these 7 years is mentioned in those verses. It's also called the 70th week of Daniel. And we'll get more into that when we get to Daniel chapter 9. So this satanically empowered man will gain worldwide control with promises of peace. This is where there's a peace treaty. This is how the Antichrist is able to achieve peace and really control up to the first 3.5 years, the first half of the tribulation. And You will be aided by the false prophet, which will point to him. That will require a system where you only worship the Antichrist. And this leads up to the midpoint of the tribulation, called the abomination that causes desolation. Okay. There's a lot going on here. I'm not going to try to explain all. I'm pretty far behind already, but there's just a lot of stuff here where this tribulation is talking about this little horn that rises, that has the affluence to win over other nations. This is the one that pulls out the three of the other horns. In Revelation, it talks about a white horse coming in, riding into the scene in chapter 6. Rides in a white horse, so it kind of looks like a Christ, but doesn't have any bows along, with it. Doesn't have any arrows with his bows, so he doesn't need to actually use force to win over other people, other nations. 7-year peace agreement made between the Antichrist and Israel. And then at this point, a Jewish temple will be standing again. This is where they stand up, build a temple. It might be that the Antichrist is trying to win favor along with this peace treaty to make this temple, but the reason why it's raised up is so that he can declare himself to be God. And that's the abomination that causes desolation. And this is the sealed judgments that are in this first half of the tribulation. Second half culminates in the Battle of Armageddon. All these judgments are in Revelation chapters 8 through 16. The Antichrist declares himself to be God. And some of the things that he does is he puts an end to regular sacrifice. So really upsets the Israelites. And then he does things that causes the abomination, and a prefiguring of that is this one ruler back in, I think it's maybe 75 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, where he was ruling, and he made the Jewish people so upset, and he put a pig on the altar, and he slaughtered a pig, and he forced people to worship, and so forth. And there's writings that say that he tried to stuff pork in the priests' mouths and other things, and so very much the abomination, especially in Jewish eyes. And what came out of that was the Maccabee family that rose up when this thing was ordered in many of the Jewish towns. The Maccabee family rose up against that, killed a person that led this abomination that led to the Maccabean revolt, which later turned into that they, surprisingly, I guess, won, and with that is the birth of Hanukkah. That's how Hanukkah was born. Through the rededication of the temple by the lighting of the candles, the menorah. Yeah. All right. So trumpet and bowl judgments. So the Antichrist-led world government is now fully in place. This is where you have the mark of the beast, and you have all these things that it comes to a point where the Antichrist has tremendous power. In Revelation, God sends 2 witnesses, and then the 2 witnesses get destroyed, get killed, right? And then with that, the world celebrated their death by giving gifts to each other. That's how deplorable and wicked they were. Okay, so that's all in Revelation. I think it's chapter 13 there. And then you have the Battle of Armageddon. And I point out these references because turns out that the book of Zechariah has a lot on the end times. So if you really want to dig into it, part of the prerequisite really is to learn that book, Zechariah. All right, second coming. The Bible predicts Jesus' return. These are just some facts that there are just so many Bible references to the second coming of Christ. 1,800 plus references. And 7 out of 10 chapters 7 out of every 10 chapters in the New Testament talks about his return. That's just how much it is. Did you know that Enoch predicted the second coming of Christ? Yeah, so this is in Jude, verses 14 and 15. So he's saying, behold, the Lord is coming with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment on all. But if you look at this coming, it's like, it's all bad. It's all, you don't want to look forward to this, right? Okay. I'm going to kind of speed up on these so you can, you'll get these slides, like I say. Jesus' Olivet Discourse, he talks about his return. This is when the disciples keep on asking him, like, tell us of your coming. When are you coming back, right? So this is Matthew 24. I added verses 27, 28 in addition to the other 3 verses that you've already seen. Jesus will return to Israel on the Mount of Olives. The rapture, we don't know when, but we know where, the precise location of his return. And that's in Zechariah 14, verses 3 to 5. It talks about on that day, that's Jesus' feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Okay? He comes to judge the world. Christ will return to defeat Satan, the great dragon, and begin his 1,000-year reign. Sorry, I'm going to fly through these. So the Antichrist and the false prophet will be thrown in the lake of fire. Armies that attack Israel will be destroyed. Again, Zechariah chapter 14 has a lot of this. Satan is bound. Entering the millennium, Satan is bound for 1,000 years. And this is where there's judgment of the nations, known as the judgment of the sheep and the goats. In Matthew 25, there's a number of passages in Matthew 25 that talks about this judgment of the during that time at the end of the second coming. So he's coming to reign on the earth, coming to reign with the saints. There'll be the resurrection of the tribulation martyrs. Those martyrs that died during the tribulation, they will be resurrected. At this time is the resurrection of the Old Testament saints. And then these resurrections of the martyrs and Old Testament saints happen after the second coming, but prior to the millennium. This is when it happens. All right. Let's see if okay. So during this millennium, Christ will rule on earth from his capital, Jerusalem. Marriage supper of the Lamb happens during this time, during this period, sometime during this period. The judgment seat of Christ will take place. The followers of Christ will rule with him. And what's amazing in the millennium, there'll be no war, no disease. The lifespan reverts back to the era before the flood. The lifespan will be like centuries. However, there will be sinners in the millennium, even though Christ is ruling in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. Why is that? Because there will be marriages during the millennium, and the children that are born, some of those children will rebel against the things of God because they still have the sin nature. Despite all the witnessing, Christ is reigning and all that, they will still defy. Just like today, each person born in the millennial age will make a personal decision for or against Christ. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Usually will be sinners or will be unbelievers, unsaved?
Both. All humans born during the millennium are born sinners. So they'll be sinners. And then a number of those will not believe.
But only believers go in.
You have to start, yeah. And the believers that go in still have a sin nature. Right? Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, even though Satan's been bound. So that just in a way points to the need for Christ and the depravity of man.
So the devil make you do it doesn't apply?
Yeah, it doesn't apply. The devil's not there to make you do it, right? So that is just so surprising. Yeah. So what's neat about it is Jesus will be king of the earth, ruling from Jerusalem. Interesting passage in Micah 4. So this is a lot of passages that you guys can dig on your own. Nations will come to worship and learn of God's ways. Starts with believers only, a unified government, and there'll be a worldwide knowledge of God. There'll be peace. There'll be justice. There'll be obedience. There's holiness, increase, and joy. So there's a lot of just great things happening, and there's actually even a lot of peace even in the animal kingdom. Yeah, they will have prolonged life expectancy. There will be comfort for those whose sorrow, removal of sickness, healing of the deformed. There will be a change in the nature of ferocious animals. This is mentioned in Isaiah 11. Change in environment. So a lot of great things are happening during this millennial age. Marriage of the Lamb to the bride. And this marriage supper of the Lamb is a glorious time of celebration. It takes place on earth, includes all the Jews that were saved during the tribulation period. And this marriage concept is used throughout the Bible, and it's also to give not only a lesson but a warning. So here in Matthew 22, this parable of the marriage feast, those not dressed in wedding clothes will be ushered out of the feast, meaning that you didn't believe in God, you didn't believe in Christ, you're not dressed accordingly to be so-called eligible to be in the feast. So that's a study in Matthew 22. The parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. The bridegroom comes, the bridesmaids are ready to go into the wedding feast. But some of them could not go because they didn't have the oil in the lamp and things like that. So the door was shut. It sounds rude, but they have time to be ready, and they were not ready. Okay. Day of the Lord. I mentioned from the rapture to the end of the millennium. When the 1,000 years are complete, Satan will be released from his prison, deceive many to go into war against the saints in Jerusalem. And what, we think about the millennium when it started was all believers and they had some children, and through the 1,000 years, there's enough of the born humans that will not believe in God. So much so that they're deceived by Satan, and they form like a huge body of people to be immediately defeated. Seems kind of unfathomable. Christ is on the throne in Jerusalem. You got all this good things happening with people, no war, and environment, the animals. Everything seems to be almost like utopia, and then you still have loads and loads of people that will rebel. It's one of the most I don't know, to kind of point out the depravity of man, there's one verse in Revelation where it says they know God is coming to judge, and they say they'd rather have rocks fall on them. That is like, what are you thinking? You know what's right, and you still rather have rocks fall on you. Wow. Anyway. So the devil was thrown in the lake of fire, resurrection of the wicked dead, resurrected, go to basically hell. All right. Those not found in the book of life will be thrown in the lake of fire. So we think about the millennium, and what's the purpose of the millennium? To fulfill the prophet's predictions. There's a lot of predictions about the millennium. Disciples' prayer in Matthew 6 talks about kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. To get recompense or our rewards. And that fourth bullet, to re-emphasize man's depravity. The necessity for Christ's death. So the fallen nature man still exists. And then really, as it's all, quote, cleansed, now we can have ushered in the age of righteousness. You have to do all this so that age of righteousness, you have the new heavens and earth. Yes?
I think it could fall under the category of prophet's prediction, but most importantly, God's, all of his covenant to David.
Yeah.
You know, those 7 big covenant of the.
Yeah.
That's what that, so that's really important.
It is.
Israel is his prize people.
Yeah.
Hasn't completed yet. And it will.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, part of the covenants, which is another topic, it takes a lot of background to understand the Davidic covenant, and that's like, it covers a lot of the other covenants as well, but to fulfill it, this has to happen. And then you have to kind of walk through what does this fulfill and link it back to each of the Old Testament passages that talk about it. Yeah, Jane.
One point I'd make on that.
I'm Sharon.
Thanks for that point. You know, I was talking to our Wednesday night about the Russell of Eschatology study, and I made the point that everything in this world right now, everything, all things are pointing to the fact that God is going to redeem an oath and promise to the people of Israel. Period.
Mm-hmm.
All of everything else, AI, wars, famine, stuff, it's all pointing to God is about to redeem his promise, the sworn oath to the people of Israel. All of these things are true as well, but I agree with you, they're secondary.
Yeah.
God has a special plan for the people of Israel, even called believers, children of Abraham by faith.
Yeah.
That's how important Israel is. Zechariah chapter 8 says, you poke Israel, you poke God in the eye. And so that's why it's important for us to, even in our evangelism, say God's about to restore his promise and redeem his promise to Israel. Get on board. Repent, believe, become a child of Abraham by faith.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, amen. And
I'm a little confused about the timing. You said, I was under the impression the end of the Great Tribulation is when Christ comes on the heaven and when he sets up his kingdom. But there's 1,290 days or 1,335 days at the end. I thought that beginning, you said there was the judgment of the peoples of the nations, and more at the end, or before the millennium. But wouldn't before the millennium be during the time of Armageddon? Isn't it just those few days, extra days of Daniel that is spoken of? Wouldn't that be the very beginning of the millennium when they're doing that? So that extra 30 days, it says 1,290 days and 1,335.
yeah.
So that's the kingdom and the judgment.
William MacArthur explains that, 1260, and then says 1295, and then there's one reference to 1335.
Yeah.
Is that there is this kind of transition period.
Right.
The second coming's happened. Yeah, so but it doesn't necessarily mean that the millennium started then. There may be this as much as, 75-day period where there's this kind of transition. Just in the same way that when God removes his restraining influence, Holy Spirit, it doesn't necessarily say that's the start of the tribulation. There may be some time, there's There's no verse that specifically says that when the rapture happens, the tribulation begins. So we think that there is, just by inference, some transition there. And the same thing by inference, there's some transition from when second coming happens to the beginning of the kingdom. But there is some kind of fudge factor that's given there. We just can't be
I just didn't see it as being in the Great Tribulation portion, you know. I see it.
The 75 days, yeah.
Tribulation's over, but when the kingdom has that get started.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so now that with the millennium being complete, Jesus hands over the kingdom to the Father, 1 Corinthians 15. The present heavens and the earth are to be destroyed. 2 Peter 3:10 talks about the earth, and I think the language is like all the molecules will be like melted or disintegrate, right? Yeah, new heavens and earth. Believers forever with the Lord. No more curse, death, mourning, crying, or pain. Although the physical properties in heaven and earth are not really described in detail, we can kind of take home that Revelation chapter 21 just gives us a perspective that all things are made new. And the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband, just talks about, again, going back to John 14, how that's prepared. And what is this New Jerusalem? It has the glory of God. And this glory of God, what is that? That's the Lamb. The Lamb is the glory, is the light. So it just gives you just a wonderful picture of what to look forward to in Revelation 21. Let's see. Yeah, that's it.